and you can really unplug and reconnect with nature. And that's when you can feel the breeze in the trees, you can smell that freshness, you can taste that fresh alpine water, and it reminds you of your vulnerability and your connection to nature. And I think that is a really important and significant thing for people to be able to re-embrace in this day of Instagram and Facebook and spending so much time on our mobile device. When you get out to places like this, there's no Instagramming out there. You're out there and you're enjoying it. And I think that's a really profound moment for most people.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I consider it my mission to inspire and empower you to take some of the most amazing adventure travel trips around the world. Today we have a particularly beautiful one. We're going to Banff, Canada. I know a lot of people may never have heard of it, but this has actually been on my radar for quite some time. I had heard repeatedly how absolutely stunning it is. And I was lucky enough to meet somebody who once lived there, so we get the inside scoop today. And this is one of the great places that you can go where actually the whole family can enjoy it, because you can tailor your trip exactly to what your interests are, your skill levels. You can have easy days, hard days. You can have a base camp, or you can go out in the backcountry. There's just tons of opportunities to do everything from hiking, biking, paddling, horseback riding, hot tubbing, stargazing, and just eating major good food, because it's also a foodie destination as well. This is really an epic destination, and one that you can tailor to fit your budget. So without further ado, let's get started with today's interview with John, who I was fortunate enough to meet on my recent trip to New Zealand. John, we met at a mountain cabin in New Zealand, but I don't know a whole lot about you. Can you please just introduce yourself and perhaps tell us your age and where you're from?
Sure thing. Yeah, my name's John. I originally grew up in Ontario and then moved out west and lived for about 5 years in Banff. And it's an absolutely wonderful place to be in the Rocky Mountains. Nowadays, I've moved a little further west into a little town called Nelson, British Columbia. And I'm in my mid-30s. And having operated a tourism organization in Banff for a number of years, I now run a road biking tour company based out of Nelson, BC.
Very cool. Very cool. So I know we're going to be talking about Banff in particular today, but if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole adventure travel. Like I said, I met you on an adventure. So how did you get into this whole adventure travel shtick?
Yeah, I can really trace it back to a fall many, many years ago after graduating from university. And I headed out west, just a little bit west of Banff, actually, to a little place called Lake O'Hara. And I worked up for a season up there, a little lodge, where the only distractions essentially were hiking or paddling on the lake and being outside. And it was a real revelation for me as a bit of a city boy, and just really cemented my love for nature and the outdoors. And I moved back to Toronto after that, did a bunch of things. And then the calling of the west, the mountains, was always there. So that's what brought me back to Banff. And that's what sort of stoked my love of wild places. And since then, we've had the pleasure and the opportunity to do a lot of cycle touring in different parts of the world, including Cuba and Patagonia and Europe and so forth. And then we went to New Zealand and had a great trip there.
Yeah, that was probably one of my best trips ever. And I've been to a lot of places, but that was spectacular, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful landscape, wonderful, kind people, so much to see. A lot of people sort of said, what does it remind you of? And our common answer was British Columbia. It has a lot of that same sort of rugged natural appeal. And we're lucky to have lived in a place like British Columbia and traveled in a place like New Zealand too.
Very cool. A lot of people may never have heard of Banff. Can you tell us a little bit about what is Banff National Park and where is it? And if you can kind of just give us a brief overview of where it is that we're heading to today.
Yeah, certainly. So Banff is a little town about an hour or so west of Calgary, Alberta, and it's right in the Rocky Mountains of Canada. Although the name of the town is Banff, it's also it's contained within Banff National Park, which is the third oldest national park in the world. Only Yellowstone and Royal National Park, I believe, in Australia came before that. So it's really unique, and there's very few places in the world that are within a national park setting. And I'll chat, I'm sure, a little bit later about what some of those specifics entail. But the key thing is that it's a destination that's protected, that is kind of contained, and that is extraordinarily beautiful as well.
And when you say extraordinarily beautiful, what does the landscape look like there? I'm sure there's many parts of it, but what strikes you the most?
Yeah, to me, the combination of mountains, glaciers, rivers, valleys, forest, it really has everything you could possibly want in a mountain area. So much so that Banff and its surrounding national parks together form a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Canadian Rocky Mountains National Park, I believe it is, which has been recognized for its scenic beauty. So it's that whole stretch of national parks up and down that corridor there are just totally, I mean, the hiking's incredible. It's so accessible. There's so much to do, but more importantly, there's so much wildlife. There's so much protected area because it really is such a gem of a location.
Are these really tall mountains like we think of? I've never been in that part of the Rockies. How tall mountains are we talking about here?
They are tall. However, they're not tall as you might expect in places like Colorado or certainly in Nepal, the Himalayas. They're tall in terms of their relief from sort of from valley level, but it's also just the sheer the beauty of them, the way that there's glaciers all over the place, the streams that wind through there, the valley bottoms. It's kind of an intersection of everything without being 8,000 meters or anything like that. Obviously, the tallest peaks are only around 3,600 meters. But the sheer beauty of them is really what impresses most people.
Oh, so that's good too. So usually altitude is not going to be an issue for people that are hiking up these mountains.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Banff itself is located around 1,400 meters, and Lake Louise, another community nearby, is about 1,700 meters. So your starting point's not that high, and then any mountain you're going to hike up to or summit. Generally, most of the hiking trails aren't too much above 2,000, 2,200 meters, and if you're summiting mountains, a lot of those are around 3,000 meters. So you're right. Elevation is really not a huge concern for most people. You might find yourself a little thirstier than usual, but that's probably the biggest change.
That's actually my favorite kinds of mountains, so that I get the joy of earning that view at the top without having to worry about sucking my wind so badly with the lack of oxygen. So I think that's a cool feature. So you talked a little bit about wildlife. What kinds of animals might we see there?
Yeah, the Banff National Park and the surrounding parks there are really well known for their amazing preserve of habitat, which has allowed for species like grizzly bears and black bears to be able to flourish there, which is really extraordinary that there's very few places left that have that same kind of density in North America. And then we've also got things like elk and bighorn sheep, mountain goats, deer are some of the big ones that people might find. And then you've got all sorts of smaller animals, but those sort of megafauna are the ones that most people are drawn to.
I think it's cool about the bears, but a lot of people are afraid of bears. Can you talk a little bit about bears and particularly the grizzlies?
Yeah, so I mean, the grizzlies they're an impressive creature. Most bears are not really super keen on hanging out with humans, so they're even less excited about you than you are about them, perhaps, in terms of getting to meet them. But they're a wonderful species to see. They're super impressive. Generally, they're going to be further up into the alpine, especially as the summer goes on. Although early in the springtime, they do come down, and that's where the valley bottoms open up first in terms of some of the feeding. So they'll come down and they'll look for food sources, and that's generally where you get the most common kind of visitor interactions with bears. And in a place like Banff, Parks Canada is really great at being able to manage that and to protect corridors and to be able to close areas off. But one of the most important things is for people to know is to keep your distance from wildlife and to give them a healthy respect. So whether that's, you're out there hiking or whether you're out there, you photograph a bear, give them at least 10 bus links is the common term.
Okay, cool. Do you have any cool bear stories you'd like to share?
I've actually got a couple. I was up hiking in a place called Sunshine Meadows, which is quite close to Banff. It's actually a ski resort in the wintertime. But in the summertime, it has these just spectacular meadows. And we were hiking up along a trail, and we saw a few tourists ahead of us, and they just started freaking out and panicking. We said, "What's going on?" And they pointed across, and there was this big grizzly bear. And sure enough, we looked over and saw this grizzly bear stand up on its back legs. And it's one thing to see a grizzly bear on four legs, and you get a sense of its size. But when they stand up, you really notice that these things are significantly large. And then it did a bit of a bluff charge towards us. It was still, quite far away, but enough that we certainly were quite concerned and cautious. And then it kind of pulled up and kept going on its way. So that was kind of one instance of being out in the wild, out hiking, that really reminded you of the power of grizzly bears and really just how impressive they are. And then secondly, very early on in my relationship with my partner, I had taken her camping in a little lake near Banff and had brought a canoe over, and we had just put the canoe in the water. And as we started to paddle off, we heard some splashing behind us. And sure enough, we looked back to see this huge grizzly bear emerge from the lake. And we were, maybe 15 feet away from it. It was so close. I don't know how we got into the canoe and didn't see it in the first place. And we watched this grizzly bear amble across the waterfront. And we were so close that, we could see these, multiple inch claws on this bear. And it just tracked its way right through the heart of the campground. Not to scare your listeners, but this bear certainly had a mission which had nothing to do with people. It just wanted to literally get from one side to another and couldn't care less about people. So again, another really impressive memory of just seeing how determined and how, kind of independent these bears are.
About how tall do you think it was when it stood up?
I'd hazard somewhere in the range of 7 to 8 feet. It was enough that it certainly felt bigger than I did.
Wow. That's cool. The only wild bears I've ever seen in all my time was when I was in a very remote area checking out some migratory birds that overwintered down here. And the mama bear, the 2 cubs saw me. I didn't see her at all. And so they just ran from us. They don't want the encounter most of the time. And I think up in the grizzly area, aren't you supposed to make noise if you're rounding a bend? So you're just trying not to surprise them?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Make yourself seen. And I mean, the best strategy to avoid a grizzly bear encounter is to do just that, is to avoid one, and making yourself loud, known, whether it's chatting loudly, singing, traveling with other people is really helpful too. Just make sure that the grizzly bear knows you and you don't sneak up on it, and you should be all right.
Cool. Any other animal stories you'd like to share before we move on?
Those are the big ones that stand out for me. I think just, you partly living in a place like Banff, you get used to seeing deer and elk in the town site, and they become a bit of a common occurrence. But when you live in a place like that, you have to remember that for people visiting there, it's often a very new experience for them, and it's very exciting. What I would caution most people to is that that's wonderful, and we encourage people to enjoy that kind of wildlife experience, but to again keep your distance. And it's easy to forget that when you're in a town site that maybe you feel like you can get up close and almost like pet the deer or feed the deer or something like that. But these are still totally wild creatures, and oftentimes people just forget to give these space the animals that they need to be safe and secure.
I was in an area just outside the Grand Tetons, and this man in the campground, a moose had come into the campsite area. He was within 5 feet of this ginormous, it was a moose or elk. I can't remember exactly what it was. I was like, that thing, if it decides it's mad at you, it's going to get you. I thought it was crazy. I mean, literally within 5 feet of that animal, trying to get photos for Instagram or something. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens more than it should. And I think that's part of public education and visitors' responsibility to keep wildlife safe, keep themselves safe, and really think about the value of trying to get that perfect picture and give the animals more respect instead.
Well, let's move from wildlife and let's get into some of the activities. My personal favorite is hiking. Can you talk a little bit about some of the trails that you might see in Banff?
Yeah, I think Banff, one of the really appealing things about Banff National Park and the Banff town site is just the sheer number and scale of hikes available. And Banff is really fortunate in that a lot of these are literally right from the town site you can do. You don't even need a car. There are a number of hikes that are just a short drive away as well. And there's a range of hikes that are, flat little walks around town that are around a meadow or a ravine, or other ones where you can get up a little small mountain. So there's even one in town called Tunnel Mountain, which is a short 300-meter hike up. And that's a really scenic kind of 45 minute to an hour round trip. So you have all those sort of things. And then you've got your multiple day backcountry hikes as well, which are quite a different scale. So that's a big part of the appeal to Banff is you can do a short little hike where you can work yourself up to something far more significant.
I saw too that you can even do heli hikes where they'll actually transport you out into the backcountry, and there's a lodge or something out there as well.
Yeah, there are. Those happen a little bit more just outside of the national park, into some of the provincial parks as well. But in my mind, I think one of the real appealing parts of it is to go on these multiple day backcountry hikes. And there's spectacular campgrounds. There's a few alpine huts scattered around as well. And the beauty of going on these hikes is that you get far enough away from the crowds, from civilization, You're going to get out of internet and cell phone connectivity pretty quickly, and you can really unplug and reconnect with nature. And that's when you can feel the breeze in the trees, you can smell that freshness, you can taste that fresh alpine water, and it reminds you of your vulnerability and your connection to nature. And I think that is a really important and significant thing for people to be able to re-embrace in this day of Instagram and Facebook and spending so much time on our mobile device. When you get out to places like this, there's no Instagramming out there. You're out there and you're enjoying it. And I think that's a really profound moment for most people.
And you have almost zero light pollution out there too. So I hear the stargazing is amazing.
Yeah, it really can be. And particularly there's particular times when the auroras, are prominent, that you can see those colors flashing, dancing across in the sky. But more often than not, the Rockies are generally quite clear as well, for the most part. So you're going to be more than likely blessed with some super starry nights.
Very cool. Any favorite camping sites you want to share?
Yeah, there's a couple, and generally for me, more the ones that take a little more getting out to. There's a couple ways to approach a place called Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park. And they call that the sort of the Zermatt of Canada, the little Switzerland. It's got a quite prominent peak there. It's about a 25 to 30 kilometer hike, depending which way you go in. And there's just some wonderful camping opportunities out there too, or camping right there. There's also another place very close to Banff called Egypt Lake. And it's one of the largest campgrounds in the national park, at least from a backcountry perspective. And partly because there's a number of different trails you can take to get there. And you can turn that into a multiple day trip and stop at some campgrounds along the way that are really, really quite beautiful. And part of the beauty to me of these campgrounds is that you meet really wonderful people, some like-minded people, and people are in such good spirits that it's such a great communal experience.
Very cool. And Banff is quite well visited. I believe it's like 5 million visitors a year. So if you get further away from, like, how far in do you have to go, and all of a sudden you're kind of away from the crowds?
It's a good question. I think that's what a lot of people would like to know too. Yeah, I think last I saw it was, you're right, there's certainly multi-millions of people that come to the park, and that's particularly in the summertime. That being said, if you're kind of downtown Banff Avenue, they call it, you're going to see a lot of people, and that's just the reality. However, if you step even 1 or 2 blocks off of downtown Banff Avenue, it's amazing how much quieter it gets. And when you get out on some of these deeper backcountry hikes, same thing, you'll be leaving the crowds behind pretty quickly. And that to me is part of the appeal that, although some people might think that Banff is pretty heavily visited in the summertime, it all depends on where you go.
Right. And Banff is actually a year-round destination. I don't do the cold very well, but the cold out there is also exciting because there's all sorts of things to do. Can you talk about the different seasons and why you might want to go spring versus fall versus winter versus summer?
Yeah, sure. So, spring is a great time in terms of the days are obviously getting longer. You're going to be there a little bit before the crowds. The only challenge with spring is if you're into hiking, generally that the snow kind of lasts a little bit longer. So it's a better time to go if you're keen to sort of stay in the valley bottoms, to do some paddling perhaps, to do some walks around town sites, to discover, the culinary scene in Banff is a great option too. But getting into the Alpine, that's where summertime really shines. These trails open up. There's all sorts of things to do for those few months. As you get into the fall, you get this brilliant color change. The larches or the tamaracks start changing their colors into this bright gold and yellow. That's sort of in mid to late September. And then in October, you start to get some early snow. And the fall can be a wonderful time for those really winter enthusiasts to come out. You can start cross-country skiing by generally early November. And then the ski resorts are open by sort of mid-November onwards. And that ski season lasts all the way up until mid-May in some cases. So the wintertime is maybe a lesser known, but an equally wonderful time to go, both in terms of the activities of skiing, but also the scenic beauty. There's something really quite significant about seeing these, beautiful white snow-capped peaks contrasted against a brilliant blue sky. And you can avoid a lot of the crowds that you'll see in the summertime by coming in the wintertime to enjoy these wonderful sights.
Cool. For those that are not familiar or don't want to drive in the snow, can you still take the train in and then just walk wherever you want to do so you don't have to worry about driving in the snow?
Yeah, you can certainly. I mean, again, part of the beauty staying in a place like Banff or Lake Louise, which is just 45 minutes away, is those town sites have hotels and restaurants to stay at, and then you can walk literally out your front door and go do a whole bunch of different trails and walks from there. Or there's some providers that will shuttle you out to take you on scenic tours, go for short walks with them. There's all sorts of way to be able to get out and discover the park.
Very cool. Now let's go to your love, biking. Can you tell us a little about the biking opportunities there?
Yeah, there's really some wonderful biking out there, both for road biking and for mountain biking. As being a little more partial to road biking, that to me was kind of what stoked my love of road biking. There's a wonderful kind of side road between Banff and Lake Louise, which is about 60 kilometers. It's called the Bow Valley Parkway. You're liable to see some wildlife out there. It's a beautiful, relatively flat road. Got a couple little hills in it, nice turns, very, very scenic ride. There's also a beautiful loop just outside of Banff to a nearby lake. It's about a 20-kilometer round trip. So that's a wonderful kind of hour and a half ride, if you like. And then the mountain biking trails are what we call more cross country. So they're going to be a little more relatively flat as opposed to the downhill biking that you might get a little further into British Columbia, which is really, really scenic. They've done a great job in Banff of constructing a number of trails which are officially designated, well maintained, and they're generally shorter sort of trips that you can kind of go do in half an hour or so. Not necessarily day-long epics, which is really nice because you can kind of get a taste of this, a taste of that, and do some other things.
Can you tell us about the Moraine Lake Highline? I read that was considered a really cool trail.
Yeah, so there's a couple trails right out of Moraine Lake, and part of the beauty of Moraine Lake is you're quite high up in elevation, so your starting point is gets you pretty quickly up above tree line. So you can get up to a pass up there, which is called Sentinel Pass, which is, from my understanding, arguably the highest trail feature in the national park. So you can get some wonderful views on both sides of the pass there. You get up into the larch area. So particularly in the fall, that's a really, really scenic place to go. And you kind of get the best of everything looking down a Moraine Lake. You're going to get some other little alpine lakes up there. You're going to get tree and forest. And then you're also going to get up into that, up above that, and just get wonderful, wonderful views up in the alpine.
Very cool. I'm going to ask you about one more trail before we move on. The Spray River and the Goat Creek. It says that you can get a shuttle up and then just ride downhill. That sounds kind of nice for those that may not be hardcore bikers.
Absolutely. That's a great way to go. The nice thing about that trail is it's almost like a railway grade. So you can either have a nice, good sustained pedal up for a couple hours, or you can, as you said, take the shuttle and just bomb your way down. And the beauty is that trail actually brings you right down into the Fairmont Banff Springs. And that trail is actually the starting point for what is becoming a really, really popular ride called the Great Divide, which starts in Banff and goes all the way down to the border between USA and Mexico. So every June, you're going to see increasing numbers of people that come up on their mountain bikes, all set up to ride this huge trail. So you can get a little taste of it just doing it from the Goat Creek Trail.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, another love of mine is I love to raft. So I know there's some whitewater rafting opportunities and also some regular canoeing and kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty is as you keep asking all these questions about things, you're absolutely right. There really is so much to do in Banff National Park. So you can do a little whitewater rafting, which generally the more intense whitewater rafting actually happens a little bit outside of Banff, but Banff is a great hub for that. Otherwise, there's some sort of milder, gentler paddling that you can do, both in terms of rafts that people will take you down the Bow River, right actually down by the Fairmont Banff Springs. It's kind of a scenic raft trip there. Or you can do some paddling a little upper on the river, which is, again, right near the Banff town site. It's nice, flat, calm water up there, kind of the river meanders. So you can take a canoe out and just wind your way along the river, and you might see some moose. You might see beavers are pretty common around there. You're likely to see some birds. And again, that's just a really great way to get out from the busyness of Banff Avenue and lose yourself in nature and just enjoy the really scenic surroundings.
I see, too, they also offer some horseback riding tours as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's nothing you can't do in Banff. And it's true. There's horseback riding right in town. And like the hikes that we were talking about, too, there's short horseback riding tours of about an hour or so where you can just kind of get a taste of it in the local area. All the way up to multi-day trips where they'll take you out way into the backcountry. There's lodges that they have, so you can get the full meal deal, quite literally, have a nice stay in comfort, or you can go a little more rugged as well. So there's really all sorts of horseback options depending on what you like to do. There's also a number of providers up in Lake Louise, and that's a really, really spectacular place to do some horseback riding too.
Cool. Cool. Now, after all this activity, we're going to be a bit sore. Is there a hot spring around there that we might be able to get our muscles loosened up a little bit?
Yeah, they thought of that as well. So there's an original hot springs, which is called the Banff Cave and Basin is what it's called. The Cave and Basin is the actual original hot springs that was found there. And that's actually why Banff was designated a national park. It's certainly a beautiful place and all that, but these hot springs were really, really appealing. They've since made that a National Historic Site, so you're no longer able to bathe in those hot springs. However, the good news is there is what they call the Banff Upper Hot Springs, a little further up the mountain there, and that's quite a big pool. It's outside, and people are welcome to come there all throughout the year. And that's a really warm, refreshing hot springs with, again, wonderful views looking out across the valley.
And I heard they even let you go there at night so you can go there and watch the stars as well.
Yeah, exactly. And again, if you come there in the wintertime, to my mind, that's the best time to go. It's going to be a little bit quieter. You feel that sharp, cold air out there, balanced with the nice warmth of the pool. And it feels even starrier. The nights are obviously longer at that time of year too. So that would be my insider take on when to go. Let's
talk a little bit or any more about action or activity in the park before we go into the townships.
I think you've covered the big ones there, from hiking to biking to paddling and rafting. Those are the main activities that most people tend to do.
How about telling us a little bit about the village of Banff itself?
Yeah, so the village of Banff there's a little less than 10,000 people that live in Banff. Although if you come there in the summertime, you might be forgiven for thinking it's a small city. Population swells to sort of somewhere in that 30 to 40,000 range during the summertime. But it attracts a really outdoorsy type of person who wants to live there or wants to visit there. It's a beautiful historic downtown to it. It's been planned that the main street of Banff Avenue contains your sort of main retail, dining, heart of the downtown, kind of along a couple blocks. So it's nice and centralized and compact. And then the hotels sort of continue out from that in one direction, and you can cross the bridge onto the other side of town. There's a couple other hotels over there. So the beauty of Banff is because it's within a national park, the size of the town site has actually been capped and contained. So there's very limited development permitted beyond what's already there, which essentially prohibits any kind of sprawl. So as a result, anywhere that you live, if you're coming to Banff to live or you visit, you can easily walk around pretty much the entire town site or bike around, and there's really no need to have a car.
Nice, nice. Now, why would somebody choose, or tell us about Lake Louise and then compare and contrast why you would choose one over the other as a base, or do you do both?
Yeah, some people say that Banff is the place to go to sort of look and observe the mountains, whereas Lake Louise is the place to go if you really want to get yourself up into the mountains. And I think there's some truth in that. Lake Louise it's a little higher up in elevation. It's a much smaller community. So there's less to do in terms of the sort of downtown ambience and shopping and all that. The real appeal for Lake Louise is to get out there and to go hiking and to go biking and to just summit mountains and to really embrace that mountain spirit. So in my mind, I think Lake Louise is that much more spectacular just because you're obviously right there at a wonderful lake. The mountains and glaciers come up right up against it. And the number of hikes that you can do right around there and up around Moraine Lake are really, you could spend a week up there and you still feel like you're scratching the surface.
Very cool. And it looks like you've got a pretty good foodie scene in Banff. Is it the same in Lake Louise? Is good eats no matter where you go?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you're certainly going to find more with a larger population base. So you'll certainly find a lot more options when you go to Banff as opposed to Lake Louise. But the places that are in Lake Louise are quite good as well. You're going to get everything from your sort of small cafe, which are sort of locally owned and run, which have been long-standing places, to some really fine dining experiences at some of the really nice hotels there in Lake Louise. And then Banff, you've kind of got all sorts of food options and culinary tastes, just as you'd find in a big city. Plus, I think one of the big appeals for most people is to dine in lodges and get that kind of real mountain type feel. And when I say that, I mean you can kind of picture those wood-strewn interiors, the roaring fireplace, and the rock, and just this feeling of being, in a rustic backcountry chalet almost. There's a number of places in Banff and Lake Louise where you can get that real, genuine feeling, and that's a really special and unique experience.
Very cool. Very cool. And speaking of accommodations too, you can do the whole gamut from backcountry camping to deluxe lodges. Can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of places that people could stay?
Yeah, you're right. I think that's, again, one of the big appeals about Banff is that there's something for every taste and every budget. And you can camp right in town. There's a couple of campgrounds right on Tunnel Mountain, and that's a wonderful view up there, and make your own food and have that sort of camping experience. Or you can stay at some more mid-range hotels that are going to give you everything you could possibly need, and then access to all the restaurants in town, all the way up to the more resort feel, which is the Fairmont Banff Springs is perhaps the most iconic place. And some of your listeners may have even seen the photos of it. It's the castle in the Rockies, and it's kind of like a Disney World of being in the Rocky Mountains. I think there's something like 8 or 12 restaurants on site there. Wonderful food, great service, and just a spectacular vista there as well. So you've got those sort of options. And then you've also got some backcountry lodges where, for people who want to get a little further off the beaten path, you can hike to those places. In some cases, you can even take a horseback ride. And then you're going to have the real true backcountry experience with, there's a place called Skokie Lodge, which is just in behind the Lake Louise Ski Resort. And it's one of these historic cabins. It's actually a National Historic Site. It only sleeps, I think, a little less than 20 people. It's not that big, but that means that you're going to have a really personalized experience. The food is cooked by the chef in-house there. You can go hiking right out the front door there, and you're going to feel like you're really in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of the wilderness, but still having this wonderful gourmet experience.
Cool. Is there anything about the Banff National Park or that area that I did not ask you that I should have asked you about?
I'm just racking my brain here, but I think you got the big ones, that's for sure, between the wildlife and the activities and the downtowns. Part of the beauty too about Banff and Lake Louise is they really are so accessible. So with Calgary and the airport in Calgary being just about an hour and a half shuttle away, you can get to Banff really, really easily. And I think one of the key things that I know that as Banff grows in popularity, that the destination in the area is really trying to encourage people is to remind them they don't need to drive everywhere, that there's public transport actually within town. There's a whole bunch of bus networks. You can actually now take a bus between Banff and Lake Louise. So the more that people can leave their cars behind, discover the area on foot, take public transit, that's not only a positive environmental benefit, but that also actually helps the guest experience, at less traffic on the road, safer, more time to enjoy the scenery too.
Now, to access the parks in Canada, you're supposed to get a Canada Parks Discovery Pass. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what's involved?
Yeah, that's right. Anytime you visit a national park in Canada, you're required to have a national park pass. So for most people who come and spend a few days in Banff, it's probably worth their while just to buy an annual pass. I think it pays for itself within a week or so. And that just gives you access to the entire national park, or all national parks in Canada, all national historic sites as well. Or you can just purchase a day pass if you need as well. But those funds help go towards the park to be able to take care of all the services there, the infrastructure, the trail maintenance, the campgrounds, all sorts of things. So that's really important that people understand that those funds go for a really great cause, and to be able to contribute towards that.
When you think back on Banff and you're talking with your friends over a fire, what are some of your favorite stories?
Oh, probably just those, is sitting by the campfire, being outside, sharing good times with great people, going to places, I think challenging yourself as well. When I first moved to Banff a number of years ago, my hiking experience was more in the front country, as they call it. So going up for day hikes, and then eventually working my way up to go on an overnight hike. And, over the years of living there, you get more and more comfortable and confident with your surroundings. And by the end, going out on multiple day hikes, multiple overnight hikes by myself, and just pushing further and further into the backcountry, ticking off places that you haven't been before, and being able to do that with great people, and going on ski trips in the backcountry. Those are the sort of experiences when you get out of your comfort zone and you go to places that are a little more challenging to get to, that are wonderfully rewarding and remarkable experiences.
John, you have a cycling company. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
That's right. I run a business called Kootenay Cycling Adventures, and we specialize in providing our visitors with fully supported road biking tours of the area. And we're based in Nelson, British Columbia, which is a little bit further west of Banff, although it's only a few hundred kilometers as the crow flies. By nature of the mountains and the glaciers and the rivers here, it's a little more of a scenic drive. So we're a little bit more remote, which means that it's a little bit quieter here, which is quite nice. But we also have a number of different lakes in the area. So it's really the best of both worlds. You get those sort of big mountain views that you get in Banff and the Rockies, but you also get these wonderful, beautiful lakes, and you get a number of charming small towns, which have a really genuine community feel to them. So we offer multiple day road biking tours of the area on nice, quiet, safe roads, and provide all the accommodation and all the meals. And it's a really wonderful and remarkable experience cycling here.
Very cool. How many days is the least day tour the most? Or tell us a little bit about the tours.
Yeah, so we can offer anything from a half day tour, which is a pretty scenic, relatively short and flat, easy bike ride, including a little ferry crossing, to all the way up to a 3 or 4 day bike ride, which is around 220 kilometers, and nice challenging days every day. And you're going to get to spend your night at these really scenic, beautiful little mountain towns, having great locally produced food. And it's a wonderful way to see an area. When you slow down and you travel at the pace of a bicycle, you get to stop a little more, you get to enjoy the views, you get to discover the area, and you get to really feel nature and in the area in a way that you don't necessarily get to when you're in a vehicle. And I think this area really excels at providing this kind of relatively undiscovered feel that's just wonderfully beautiful and has everything from hot springs to charming towns to great hikes and everything you could possibly want in a mountain destination.
Cool. Are these custom trips, or are you going in a small group, or how does that work?
Yeah, generally it's a weekly trip that we offer. So it's a kind of regular offering like that with a regular planned out route, although we certainly offer specifically catered trips as well. And that includes rail trail trips too. We're very fortunate to have a number of great rail trails located very close by here. So people can do that if they want. And again, staying in some different areas nearby, you can really create your own adventure from short days all the way up to big 100-kilometer plus days. There really is something for everybody.
So if I wanted to do it, I can go, and I'm just joining other people that also want to do it. I don't have to get together the 6 or 8 people for the group. You
got it. Exactly. You can do either way. You can join one of our pre-scheduled trips, and you can meet some other great people along the way. And that's really a wonderful part of these experiences, is meeting like-minded people, sharing a really intense experience with them, discovering each other, discovering a destination together. Or you can get a group of friends and people together and have a wonderful getaway all on your own. And either way, we can support that and make sure you have a wonderful time.
And are these really, really difficult biking tours? Do you have to be like a hardcore biker, or could it be somebody like me that would train for it, but it's not something I do all the time?
Yeah, that's the beauty of these trips, is that because they're fully supported, you can be a pretty dedicated road biker like this, or you can just kind of doing it from time to time and feel like this is well above your ability level. In which case, that sounds great. We'll help you through that. If you want to start a little bit later in the day, we can drop you off to a later point. If you feel like you're tapped out and you're done for the day, we'll put you in the shuttle and you kind of move you ahead to the next spot. Or the beauty these days is electric bicycles are growing in popularity, is we've got a couple of electric bicycles in our fleet. So that's a great option for people who want to ride the whole thing but don't feel up to it on their own energy. You get a little what they call pedal assist, and it can make all the difference between doing part of the day to doing the whole day. Well,
I'll make sure to put links to your business as well as the Banff links that we talked about in the show notes and on the webpage, which will be activetraveladventures.com/Banff. And Banff is spelled BANFF. So it's activetraveladventures.com/Banff. And John, if people want to reach out to you and find out more about what you're doing and keep up with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is to go through kootenaicyclingadventures.com. And that'll give you all the information about our tours. It'll give you a little information about me. And you can certainly get in touch with me there if you have any questions about cycling out here or about Banff, or just want to ask me any questions about some of the places where we've been. I'd be happy to chat more.
Good. Could you spell Kootenay for us?
Yeah, Kootenay is Kootenay.
Perfect. Well, John, it's been great having you on the show. Any final thoughts or any words of advice for our listeners?
Oh, all I would say is get out there as much as you can and enjoy the mountain environment. And anywhere you go out here and between Banff and the Rocky Mountains and Nelson area, everybody is only too pleased to have you and to help you have a wonderful time. So look forward to welcoming you.
Perfect. Thanks again for coming on the show, John.
My pleasure, Kit. Thanks so much for having me.
Banff sound like a dream place. I tell you, the hardest thing about this podcast for me is that keep learning about all these really cool destinations, and there just is not going to be enough time. But this has definitely gotten moved way up on the list. When I first met his partner, I was at a cabin in New Zealand, and she said she's from Canada. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to go to Banff. I hear it's so beautiful. And she said, oh, I've got to introduce you to John. He knows everything about Banff. And she was traveling, of course, with John. So we spent the evening talking. I was so delighted to get a true insider's point of view of the best way to explore this magnificent area. I'll have lots of photos and videos on the website, which will be activetraveladventures.com/Banff, BANFF, if you can't remember how to spell it, /43 for episode 43. And I hope you got a lot out of this, and I hope you add Canada, and particularly Banff and that western region of Canada to your bucket list as well. I'd like to ask you a favor. Could you please reach out to me either by email, kit@activetraveladventures.com, or you can go to the website and hit the contact me button, reach out to me on social media. The tags are on the webpage as well. And let me know how and when you listen to this show. I'm trying to get a handle around, is this something that you listen to like every Thursday morning? That's you set aside Thursday morning to listen to it because I come out every other Thursday? Or do you just listen to it when you get around to it? Do you listen to the whole show all the way through? Or is it a certain schedule? At Podcast Movement, they're saying a lot of people have routines in their podcast listening. And so that made me curious. I never really thought about that. And so if you wouldn't mind just letting me know, what are you doing while you're listening to the podcast? Are you walking the dog, taking a walk, driving to work, whatever it is that you're doing? And do you have a schedule of when you listen to the show? If so, I would love to hear from you about that. That sounds great. So I'll be back in 2 weeks, and I've got another special edition for you. We were talking a little bit about training on the biking today. Oh, and speaking of which, if you have interest in other biking episodes, check out the Puglia, Italy one. It was a great biking episode, as well as the Danube, and I'll put links to that in the show notes on the webpage as well on that. But if you're worried about whether you can do some certain adventures, I have connected with this guy, Marcus, who trains people specifically to go on adventure travel trips. So I've got him coming on the show to give us some details about what we should be doing in preparation and how you can set up a schedule so you will have the confidence to know that you can do the trip. That's the one fear that I keep hearing from people is, I want to do it, but I'm worried I won't be able to do it. So with Marcus's help, we're going to figure out how to make sure that you can do whatever the trip is that you've chosen for yourself. We'll break it down for you, and that'll be our episode coming up in 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I appreciate you listening. So I will see you in 2 weeks. Until then, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.